The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our April live chat. I'm Lakelyn Hogan, gerontologist and caregiver advocate with Home Instead Senior Care. And again, I want to thank you so much for tuning in as we talk about tips for socializing with someone living with dementia. Our live chats are brought to you by Home Instead Senior Care, a network of locally owned franchise offices. The Home Instead Senior Care Network offers in-home care with an individualized approach to keeping your older adult loved ones safe and independent at home. And to learn more, you can visit homeinstead.com. And before we jump right into today's live chat, I did want to go over just a few housekeeping items. So first, we have muted all of your lines. We know that we're all busy people. We want you to be able to go about your day and don't worry about the doorbell ringing or the dog barking. We can't hear you on our end. And then also, we are taking questions. That's the whole point of doing this as a live event. So if you have questions, we welcome you to chat them in at any time. There's a chat box or questions box right there on the right-hand side of your screen. Please don't be shy. It's likely that the questions you have, other listeners share that same question as well. So all these questions are for the collective good. We're going to learn from one another's questions. We have also some people who wrote in questions ahead of time, and we'll address those as we go. And there's no such thing as a silly question, so please, again, type those in at any time. And finally, we are recording today's webinar, so you don't have to take notes. Pardon me. We will be sending the recording back out to you via email, so you can share it or listen to it again. If you hear something and think, wow, my friend, neighbor, relative would really benefit, feel free to share with them the recording of today's live chat. And again, that will be sent to you via email once we conclude today's live chat. All right, so now that we have the housekeeping items out of the way, we'll get started by talking about today's topic. We know that with a dementia diagnosis, the person living with dementia will experience decline over time that will eventually impact their ability to communicate with their loved ones and the people around them. For many family caregivers, this can present some communication challenges along the caregiving journey. I often talk with family caregivers who want to make the most out of their visits and their interactions with their loved one with dementia, but sometimes they're unsure how to do so. And we are lucky to have a fantastic guest expert here with us today that's going to talk about overcoming these types of communication challenges. And our guest expert is Jennifer FitzPatrick. She is founder of Generations Health Education, Inc., a full-service healthcare education organization. With over 20 plus years of experience in healthcare, Jennifer is also a gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University's Certificate on Aging program. Her mission is to help healthcare organizations and professionals grow while empowering patients and their caregivers. Jennifer appears frequently in the media and has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, SiriusXM, and in Reader's Digest, Forbes, U.S. News and World Report, in addition to many more. A member of the National Speakers Association, she is one of less than 800 certified speaking professionals worldwide, and her first book, Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One, helps family caregivers and is also a resource for healthcare professionals who want to set better boundaries with their patients. So we are, again, so lucky to have Jennifer with us. Hello, Jennifer. Welcome.
Hi, Lakelyn. Thanks so much.
Well, I thought we could kick things off by maybe having you give us a few kind of general socialization communication tips for these family caregivers who have a loved one with some form of dementia. Is that okay with you before we open it up for some questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I will hand it over to you.
Great. So a lot of people have written in already some of their concerns about how to have a good conversation, how to talk to their loved one, how to connect better. And the big tip that I want to remind everybody about first, before we jump into all the questions, is that you probably, as the loved one's disease progresses, you probably want to be relying less on verbal communication. A lot of us have a really hard time hearing that. because maybe it's your husband that has Alzheimer's, and you guys always had really fantastic conversations about the world or politics or just about what's going on in your neighborhood, and you're not really able to do that quite like you used to. Or maybe it's your mom, and your mom always gave great advice, and you're really missing having those deep, engaging conversations. The truth is, you're going to get moments where you can connect verbally as the disease progresses. But once somebody gets to the mid stage of a dementia diagnosis, often you're going to have more success when you connect through activity. So I want to say that up front. I'm probably going to repeat this a couple of times today, that you want to remember that it's going to be more about connecting through activity, connecting through touch, connecting through memory, music. That sort of thing is probably going to be much more satisfying, not just for you, but for your loved one. You're probably going to experience less stress and less frustration.
Wow, Jennifer, that's a great first tip. I know I hear from caregivers so often that they really struggle with this, and you said it perfectly. As we grow up, one of our first big milestones is learning how to talk,
Right.
and being able to communicate is such a huge part of everyday life. So, unfortunately, Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia rob people of that ability to communicate. And so, as caregivers, we have to adapt. Which, as you mentioned, isn't always so easy, but I like how you remind us that we can still connect with them, but it might just have to look a little different. Maybe it's through that activity or that touch, the memory, and the music. Those are all great suggestions. So thank you for kicking us off with that first fantastic tip. And if you're ready, we do have some questions that are coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump right in.
All right. And if you have just joined us, we are taking questions live. So please feel free to enter your questions at any time in that questions box on the right-hand side. Again, anytime if you think of a question, if it pops in your head, even as we go along, please feel free to type it in. Okay, so our first question comes from Kathleen. She says, how can I communicate with a loved one who is losing their ability to verbalize? I'm caring for someone with frontal temporal dementia, sometimes that's commonly referred to as FTD, who cannot communicate whose speech center is quite compromised. Many times they will glare at me but cannot communicate what they need, or are frustrated about it, and they expect me to know what's wrong. So how can I try to elicit a response without getting them even more hostile or upset? So any advice would be most welcome. So I guess to paraphrase Kathleen's question, how can we help to use kind of those nonverbals that you talked about? How can we interpret those as caregivers and then respond? So any advice there?
Sure. So all of us probably don't realize this, because if you don't have dementia, you know that you have lots of options in the way that you communicate a message to somebody. But yet at the same time, we all are always relying on body language and facial expressions. So all of us, when we have any interaction, whether it be with somebody at the grocery store, whether it be with a friend, you're always reading their body language, but you probably don't think about it consciously very often. When you are loving somebody who has a dementia diagnosis, the best thing that you can be doing in order to determine what they want, what they need, and help them reduce their frustration and hostility is be really in tune to their facial expressions and their body language. Look at their face. Years ago, in Cruising Through Caregiving, I actually quote Dr. Peter Rabins, who is probably many of you have read that book, The 36-Hour Day. He's the co-author. And he also taught at Hopkins, where he actually guest lectured for one of my classes once. And one of the students and I were talking to him in this class once about, how do you know if your loved one is enjoying an activity, or or if it's at the right level for them, for example. And this world-renowned, wonderful, amazing geriatric psychiatrist says, well, if she's smiling, keep doing it. And if she's frowning, stop it. And I know that sounds like really elementary advice, but it's such good advice. Of course, I was expecting something much, much, much more profound and complicated, but it was so down to earth, and it was so right on the money. We always want to be looking at your loved one's eyes, looking at, is she smiling? Is she frowning? Is she furrowing her eyebrows? And know that wherever you are in the disease process, you're probably going to keep needing to do detective work. Now, the person that you love who has dementia is a grown-up. They're an adult. We know that. But a lot of the way that we're going to look to find out what they need is going to be very similar to how we would interact with a small child or a baby. My nephew and I were at dinner a couple weeks ago, and he's 2. And he started grabbing toward one end of the table, and we were looking around, and we started pointing at things. We started pointing at the barbecue sauce, and we started pointing at the water, and then we pointed at the mustard, and he wanted the mustard. And again, I know that your loved one is an adult. We always want to treat him or her just, with dignity, but a lot of it, the way that you're going to get them their needs met is just trial and error, being a detective, watching for facial expressions and body language. And when Enzo got his mustard, he gave us a little smile, and that told us, he wasn't speaking, but it was able to tell us, that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted.
Those are all great points. Using those nonverbal cues can be so helpful, and pointing out things, or I've heard some caregivers say they'll tell their loved one, well, can you show me? Can you take me to where you need to go? And sometimes that helps, whereas
yes.
They'll lead them to the restroom, and, oh, okay, and then they can use the clues in that room to kind of help. And I like how you talked about doing detective work, because so often I hear people talk about being a caregiver. Being a caregiver is kind of like being a detective, because you have to sort out clues that come from various things, such as those nonverbal cues, those facial expressions. So I think that those are all great, wonderful tips. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. And what you were saying is right there. And what Lakelyn said is wonderful, because try it. You can always try, guiding them to the bathroom and seeing if that's what they want. Those, cueing is huge. And, if it's not working, then you try something else. I know it can be frustrating. Believe me, we understand that it's frustrating, and you want to be able to just get their need met and move on to the next thing. But unfortunately, sometimes it's not that simple. Sometimes it takes a little longer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sometimes when you are a caregiver, your patients are tested, and you have to just be okay with having to slow down and take a little more time just to kind of do that detective work, which, again, when our lives are so busy and we're constantly on to the next thing, it can be hard to take that extra time. But as you've pointed out, it can be so important to clue into those different clues and those nonverbals. Well, and we actually just had somebody write in, Gail. Thank you so much, Gail, for writing in. She kind of has the opposite of a nonverbal situation. She says, my mom is still able to verbalize, but talks nonsense or makes up stories. Should we just go with it, or try and distract her from what she is talking about? So,
such
again,
a great
Gail,
question.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Any advice for her, Jennifer?
Oh, what a great question, Gail. Yeah, so I think your instinct is right. Did you notice that Gail said, should we just go with it? Yeah, just go with it. Just go with it. And in my opinion, as long as the person is not upset by the story that they're telling. Now, if they're reliving something sad or terrible, or they maybe, they're talking about something that's in the background on the news, and it's upsetting, and they, again, look at their facial expression, I might try redirection. I might try getting them engaged in an activity. But if you're talking, she seems pleasant and she's smiling. And if she seems that she's kind of in her own moment in this story that just doesn't make sense to you, I would just nod and go with it. And if you pick up, on it a little bit, on some of the themes of the story, maybe make a comment. Be prepared that sometimes you might say the wrong thing and she'll say, "Oh no, that's not what I meant, or not what I was talking about." But I say go for it as long as she seems like it's not upsetting her. For me, if it seems like it's upsetting her, I like to go in the direction of getting her engaged in an activity, trying to redirect her.
Those are some great suggestions. I often get this as well, and sometimes people with dementia kind of, it seems like they're talking nonsense, but to them in their reality, it might be that what they're saying is true. So to go along with it just kind of helps, as opposed to trying to correct them or whatnot. So yes, thank you, Gail, for writing in. That is a great question. I know people listening probably also have very similar questions to that, and we hope that those suggestions were helpful to you. And then Beverly just wrote in. Thank you, Beverly, for joining us today. And she says, my mom is in the late stages of Alzheimer's disease now. She doesn't talk anymore, just occasional one-word answers. She and I had a great relationship and talked every day about everything, so it's hard not to be able to talk with her. She doesn't seem to understand anything I say. I don't, she doesn't seem to see anything I say. I don't think she knows who I am anymore. What can I do and how can I interact with her? Gosh, it's such a tough situation, Beverly, and I've heard of several people in your same situation, so no, you're not alone. This is something that's common. And so, Jennifer, any initial thoughts or advice for Beverly?
So common. It's so common. Yeah. At first, I'm really sorry that you're missing your mom. You're missing your conversations with your mom, and you can't replace that. You can't replace her. You can't replace that relationship. But what I do want to encourage you to do is know that you're not going to get that need for having good conversations and good advice or you're not going to get that from her anymore. I really want to encourage you to consider trying to have more meaningful conversations with a friend or in a support group. Maybe join a support group and meet somebody there, or maybe you have a sister that you can talk to about the important things going on in your life. So you're never going to replace the connection, the verbal connection you had with your mom, but you still have a need that needs to get met. So I want you to think about, and maybe right off the top of your head, you can't think of someone that would be a good person for you to confide in. Maybe you need to see a counselor. Maybe you need to talk to a professional about how to manage this loss, because it's a huge, huge loss. As far as connecting with her, I'm going to go back to what I said in the beginning. It's probably going to be touch, maybe holding her hand, maybe giving her a manicure, rubbing her back. It might be that maybe if she, really likes a certain kind of music, that you listen to the music and you sing. A lot of people in the late stages of most of the dementias, it's very miraculous. They can sing sometimes when they can't talk. Put on an old movie that she used to enjoy. So try to, something that's in her long-term memory, but know that, and you can talk. I mean, you can always try. You can always start telling her about your day or telling her, but be careful about peppering her with questions, because that is so frustrating for the person when they have limited vocabulary left.
Those are really great suggestions. And Jennifer, you brought up something I think that so many caregivers often feel is, they're in this case, her mom is still physically present, but she is losing the mom she grew up with or always was able to confide in or have deep, meaningful conversations with. And last month, we actually had an expert on talking about ambiguous loss. And it is that concept of your loved one is still present physically, but you're not able to have that same relationship with them. So you're kind of grieving them, even though they're still physically there. So we did record that chat if anyone wants to listen to it, but that concept does have a term, which was new to me as of like 6 months ago. And so I think sometimes when you can put a term to what you're feeling, it can be helpful.
It does.
Yeah. And knowing, again, that you're not alone in feeling that. And then I also listened to a dementia speaker recently, and she had mentioned that sometimes when a person has dementia, their brain just can't process the words as quickly as they once were able to. So sometimes family members will have a little success by just using very simple sentences and then giving their loved one almost a 7 to 10 count pause as an opportunity to respond. So if they don't respond right away, instead of just moving on to the next thing, if you give them a little extra time, sometimes in some cases, and this might not be for everyone, that they just need that extra time to process and then extra time to think about how they're going to respond. Have you ever encountered that kind of a situation, Jennifer?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's excellent advice that you got from that speaker. And it really actually applies to all of us, because sometimes we all are engaged in conversation. We go quickly, and sometimes it's important just to give people a little bit of space. And maybe your mom's going to have a good day and she's going to be able to respond to you, because we know people have good moments and good days. So yeah, I think that's definitely worth a shot for sure.
Wonderful. Well, we thank you again so much for writing in that question, and we hope that you find it helpful. The questions are pouring in, so this is fantastic.
Great.
So we had Maria write in, and she, let me get to her original, or Melissa, pardon me. Melissa wrote in and said, in addition to Gail's question earlier, she says, about the constant talking, she said that her mother has delusions, and they're always negative, so it's very hard to redirect her away from her truth. What recommendations do you have for this? I believe much of this is rooted in perhaps subconscious anger that comes out and often and easily. So that I think is the gist of Melissa's question.
Yeah, you may want to pick up the book, The Validation Breakthrough with Naomi Feil. What you just said about the subconscious anger, or that, I think that you might find that useful and helpful, because it talks about sometimes that delusions or something that someone's focused on may have that root. So you might find that to be really helpful. But I think trying just to reassure her that she's safe. Redirecting, I know, can be really hard, but trying to just be there for her. Try to use touch if she seems open to it. You want to be careful about that. If she thinks that there's a burglar in the house, and you got to be careful. You got to approach her from the front. You got to look her in the eye. You want to make physical contact really slowly. But if she seems open to that, maybe hold her, maybe hug her, maybe hold her hand. But the other part of that, I think, is if she still has some verbal abilities and she's telling you about these horrible delusions, ask her about them. Sometimes that can maybe help resolve them. Tell me about this concern that you have. Tell me why you're upset. Describe what you're seeing. If someone is still verbal, and I know this is an imperfect answer, like all of the answers that I'm giving, because not every single thing works for every single person. But if she still has some verbal ability, she might be able to talk to you and explain what she's saying, and you may be able to work through that with her. I find that if someone's having a lot of difficult, upsetting delusions and hallucinations, that they are not engaged as much as they should be in activity. And what do I mean by that? So if somebody is at home all day and they maybe never leave, especially let's say the person is in the mid stages of Lewy body dementia, and they never really get to leave home. maybe the TV's on all day and that's really the only source of entertainment. We want to see if they have a home care aide in the home with them, we want to see that aide engaging with them, maybe taking them for walks, maybe putting on music, maybe getting them engaged in gardening. People who have dementia often can do a lot of physical activity, like they can do stretching, they can do yoga. So I would take a look at what activities she's doing, because a lot of it's that mind is idle and she's focusing and obsessing about a negative thought.
I think that last point you made there, Jennifer, is so important and so interesting. And sometimes I find that when families kind of keep almost like a journal of what their loved one is doing, especially when they exhibit different behavioral symptoms of dementia, such as delusions or hallucinations or even agitation or aggression, if they can kind of keep a little journal, it doesn't have to be in depth, but kind of make note of the time of day, what they're doing when it occurs, who's around, because it could be, something in their environment that's making them upset, or it could be, that during the afternoon time is the only time that these hallucinations or delusions are occurring. And then if the family can kind of, again, do that detective work and figure out, okay, are there some triggers? Maybe then they can use those activities that you just mentioned to kind of distract that person during that time period when those symptoms are coming about most frequently. So I really liked those suggestions. And I know we talked a little bit about activities, and you mentioned some great ones, Jennifer, but are there some other kind of general categories of activities that people can use when socializing with their loved one that has dementia?
Absolutely. So first, you want to look at the senses. What is stimulating their visual sense? What is stimulating their auditory? What's stimulating taste? What's smell? So look at what might be, arranging flowers might be something that can stimulate their sense of touch, but also auditory and visual. Look at, the first thing I think starting with is, what did the person always enjoy in the past? What have they liked? And start there. Now, of course, because dementia, all the dementias are so complicated, sometimes someone always has loved classical music, and now they have frontotemporal dementia, and suddenly it seems like it irritates them. So don't push an activity just because this is something that the person seemed to like in the past. I once worked with a family where the husband had dementia, and the wife, I thought this was so wonderful. She was keeping him at home, and the wife would, every day around 10:30, they would leave the house. And he was still mobile, he could still get around, and he was probably in, the mid stages. And whatever it was either he had a doctor's appointment, or it was they went to coffee with friends, or maybe they walked around Target, or they went to an exercise class, or they took a walk around the neighborhood. But it was a reason for him to get up every day, get cleaned up, start his day, and they were going to leave the house at some point, and then, whatever that meant. And people, when they have some kind of exercise or some kind of routine like that, they tend to sleep much better. And so we just really want to make sure that we're having some kind of, first, a routine can be very helpful, but start with what they have always liked in the past. And if it's working, great. If it's not, keep trying other suggestions. And it might be that, it might be that having a change of somebody else in the house is going to be what you need. So give you an example. So maybe it is time, if you're running out of ideas of things to do with your loved one, because you've been doing it so long by yourself, maybe it's time for a home care aide to come in and do some of these activities, or take your loved one out for an hour each day. Maybe start slow like that. Or maybe it's time to look into adult daycare, because that way your loved one is getting stimulated, and you're not the only person that's responsible for that stimulation.
Those are great suggestions. Yeah, I like the idea of switching it up and getting out and about and exercise. You had mentioned. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of research coming out that movement, and it doesn't have to be going to the gym and doing cardio. It could be those simple walks or getting out and about in the yard, raking leaves, or putting your hands in the dirt. Just that movement can be so powerful. And as you mentioned, if they're getting exercise, they're likely to sleep better
Yes.
at night, which can be a godsend for a lot of caregivers. So often, people with dementia, living with dementia, have issues with sleep. So those are some great suggestions. And I think sometimes caregivers feel like they just have to come up with all sorts of activities, and activities to them means crafts, or they have to go to a museum, but I sometimes pause and remind them that it can be simple things like ask them to help you cook dinner. Maybe they can help stir, or maybe they can help shuck corn. That's something that
Yes.
we all kind of grew up knowing how to do, or fold laundry. Those are activities, and they are feeling like they're contributing
Right.
in some way. It's meaningful. So I always remind caregivers of that. And there's also a good book. It's called Activities to Do with Your Parent Who Has Alzheimer's Dementia by Judith A. Levy. And it's a whole book on different activities. So families might want to consider diving into that book if they're really kind of at a loss for different activities to try. So thank you so much, Jennifer.
And people get a lot of great ideas. If you go to a support group, if you go to a dementia support group, you might be surprised that someone comes up with an activity idea that you haven't thought of, that they say, oh gosh, this really works. But, I would say just give things a try and just see what happens.
I would agree. Yeah. And sometimes when somebody has dementia, the activity might be appealing to them one day and not the next. So don't be afraid, caregivers, to try it. And if it doesn't work, you could try it again a few days later, because they might be interested at that point. So don't get too discouraged if you're trying something and it's not working. There's always another activity to try later down the road.
Good point.
Okay, we have another question from Maria. She says, which I'm guessing maybe is her family, we're in the denial stages of dementia with my mom. So no matter what we are doing or talking about, I'm wrong. She still is verbal, but her understanding is limited. I can't really answer questions intelligently. She uses me as a scapegoat. Therefore, we can't really converse. I've been told to just ignore it, but it's so hurtful. Oh, my heart goes out to you, Maria. That's such a situation. Jennifer, any suggestions for her?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's so tough. So I guess I would like to get a little bit more information. I know, hopefully you're still at your computer. So you say your mom is in the denial stage. Would you say, does she live with you? I mean, or do you call her? How, can you just elaborate just a little bit about how, is she still independent enough? Can you give a little bit more information about where you would say she is in the disease process and how often you might see her?
Wonderful. Well, Maria, while you're doing that, we'll circle back to your question in just a minute, because we do have another question. Is that okay with you, Jennifer? I'll give her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maria
absolutely.
Okay. So our next question comes from Margaret. Margaret says, hi, my mother has been getting aggressive with other residents at her nursing home, tripping them, flicking them. Although she's not doing it when I'm visiting, I wonder if there's anything that can be done to help. Your suggestions are appreciated. So any suggestions for Margaret?
Well, it's a complex question, because it sounds like it's not happening when you're around. So you probably don't know what the triggers are. I would ask the staff, what have you noticed are the triggers? Is there a time of day that just like Lakelyn shared earlier, doing some kind of journaling? Well, at senior living and nursing home communities, they are supposed to be documenting if there's odd behaviors or new or unusual behaviors. What time of day is this happening? Is it around certain residents or certain staff? I firmly believe that the vast majority of really aggressive behavior in somebody who has dementia is often because we're not responding to them as well as we might be able to. So I'm going to give you a quick example. I once worked with a woman whose husband had dementia, and he was repeatedly in the wintertime constantly talking about this 4th of July barbecue that they were going to have, and that they have to get ready, they have to buy the food, they have to figure out who's going to RSVP. And of course, she was she was trying to reality orient him. She was repeatedly telling him, no, it's winter, we just decorate it for the holidays. It might snow this weekend. And the other part of it that she would say to him is, and guess what? You and I never even had this barbecue, because this is a tradition that he had with his first wife. So she was getting very aggressive responses from her husband, because he just did not, he couldn't believe her. He's like, you're crazy. Of course we have the barbecue. And, he did think that they had this barbecue together, and he couldn't realize that it was winter. You don't want to argue with somebody who has advanced dementia. And he would become very, very verbally and even physically aggressive with her. And when she altered her approach, it was better. I mean, when she was just able to say, okay, yep, let's talk about the barbecue. Tell me, what should we have? Chicken? Should we have hamburgers? What do we feed the vegetarians? But I believe that most of the time that we can minimize aggressive behavior. And I think I would wonder, how is the staff responding to her? I mean, if they say, if she says to them, when am I going home? And they say, well, you are home, for a lot of people, that's going to elicit an aggressive response. So, I mean, it certainly it could be, could be somebody's perfume that's causing her to be aggressive, because she doesn't like the smell of it. So I think it's really important for the staff there, if you request a care plan meeting, to say, okay, what are we associating with this aggressive behavior, and what are you guys doing to prevent it? You want to be real careful. In cruising through caregiving, I talk a lot about, you want to be a partner with the nursing home or assisted living that your loved one has. But you deserve to know, like, what are you guys doing? Is there anything that you're associating with this behavior? What have we tried to do to prevent? Because typically aggressive behavior is generally not coming out of nowhere.
Yes, those are great tips, Jennifer. And I've had similar experiences where usually if you modify the approach, the aggressive behavior will minimize. And that detective work, like we've been talking about, is so important. And even helping the facility staff learn some of those things that you, as her caregiver, have found to be comforting or helpful. When she gets upset, I like to play music for her, and just kind of giving them a little education on some of the things that your mom enjoys can also maybe make the situation better, or provide that extra personalized care for her, hopefully minimizing that aggressive behavior. So thank you, Jennifer, for those tips, and we hope that helps you, Margaret.
And I just one last thing I just want to say. And Margaret, I do feel for you, because it must be very frustrating getting calls, or you go in and, oh my goodness, your mother did this today, but try to approach them as a partner. I can't emphasize that enough. You try not to, unless you truly think it's the wrong facility for your mom, or you really don't think the staff are, a good match. Just try to partner with them. Try to look at it as something you need to figure out together.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. And so Maria did give us some more details. So I'm going to circle back to her questions.
Perfect.
Thanks, Maria, for typing in those extra details. So as a reminder, Maria, her mother has dementia, but maybe is in some denial, and maybe takes it out on Maria, or uses her kind of as a scapegoat, as she describes it. So the additional information she provided was her mom lives in a personal care home, which was her choice. She's pretty good at hiding it. She jokes with others around her, but it seems to be spiraling downward. I just heard your response about reality orienting, and this is my problem. Every conversation is like this, and she visits her every day. Does that help you in giving her more advice?
So you're visiting her at the community every day, and it sounds like you're reality orienting her. Maybe reminding her that she has dementia. Feel free to write in if I've got that wrong, but I'm going to respond assuming that that's what you mean. So you're visiting her every day at the community, and you are reality orienting her. And I'm going to say that it sounds like maybe you're saying, oh, Mom, remember, your memory's not what it was, or this is the reason that you're here. First of all, this is going to be hard for a lot of people to hear, but you may want to cut back on your visits. A lot of people feel like, oh, I'm a terrible daughter, or I'm a terrible niece if I don't go every day or most days. But it might be too much for both of you. And, especially if she is doing well at her community, it might be time to cut back a little bit, because especially if you feel the need to be reality orienting her, that is not good for her. It might behoove you to take some breaks and just remind yourself, I know it's hard, believe me, it's frustrating, and nobody wants, if she's blaming you, or you said she's using you as a scapegoat, it's painful. It hurts your feelings, but you got to remember that her brain is not working properly. Your brain is working properly, thank goodness. So especially if you feel like you can't stop with the reality orientation, please cut back. Consider you want to cut back on your visits.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Those are some good words of advice for Maria. And Maria, thanks for those extra details. We hope that was helpful for you. We do have another question. Tammy, so somebody wrote in on behalf of their friend Tammy. She says, what tips do you have for finding an activity that a family member with dementia likes if she didn't have any hobbies? That can be maybe challenging for family members when they're trying to think of activities. Think back to what she used to do, and for the life of you, you can't remember her being a hobby person. What kind of activities would you suggest for someone in that situation, Jennifer?
Great question. So I'll tell you, I'm actually not a hobby person myself very much. So I can really relate to this. If I ever had dementia, though, what I would think people should do is just try to think about stuff that I like. I love music. I actually like all kinds of music. I love walking. Start with those things. Does she like old movies? Does she enjoy the beach? Maybe, driving her to the beach or walking on the beach. Again, sometimes we take certain things off the table because we think, oh, this person has dementia, this person has Alzheimer's, they can't go to the beach, they can't go swimming. But if their physical body is still working well, and and don't get me wrong, a lot of people with dementia, they're going to need supervision if they're at the beach or if you're going swimming. But think about stuff that she used to enjoy. And again, if you're not, think about if you're not a hobby person, what kinds of stuff, like for me, just throwing it out there, again, I'm not a hobby person, but I love walking around and window shopping. Is that something that your mom or your dad or your husband likes to do? Just getting outside and getting some fresh air. Think about I think Lakelyn made such a wonderful point a little bit earlier. And when Lakelyn said, you don't have to be, a cruise director. You don't have to be this, I don't know if anybody ever watched The Love Boat, but, you don't have to be, setting up, these elaborate activities. It can simply be like flipping through an old photo album. I'm sure a lot of us still have those. I know many of us are keeping them on our phone or our computer now, but flipping through an old photo album, or or cooking, or like Lakelyn brought up the example of folding laundry. I mean, that's activity. That is engaging to somebody. That repetitive motion, it keeps, it's good for their joints, especially if there's any arthritis. I mean, all of that, it doesn't have to be a super formal type of thing. Taking a drive, just taking a drive somewhere new. It doesn't have to be anything super fancy or super formal in order for it to be something you're doing together. Giving her a massage on her back, painting her nails, all of those things, they're not hobbies, but they can be ways to connect and engage.
Those are great suggestions. It's interesting that you said, if I had dementia, what activities would I enjoy? I think about that often too. And you're right, some of those things that I wouldn't consider them necessarily hobbies, but I really enjoy listening to music and going for walks, being out in nature, whatever that looks like. So there are lots of things. So it might be helpful for a family caregiver to sit down and make a list of things that you know the person enjoyed. It didn't necessarily have to be a hobby, and then think of ways that you could maybe make that into some sort of an activity or an experience or a shared memory together. So great suggestion. And I wanted to get to one of the questions that someone wrote in earlier. It was Amy. She said, my sweet husband is now in a home. He's 66 and was diagnosed 4 years ago with FTD dementia, primarily progressive aphasia. And he's the sweetest man ever and is now totally nonverbal, but his facial expressions are timely and funny, and they are still there. My problem is how to talk to him. I sort of don't. It breaks my heart. I don't know what he's really thinking. Are there any guidelines? And Jennifer, before you answer this question, I also want to ask if you mind talking about your concept of the dude hangout, kind of also in response to this question, because I read an article you wrote on that, and I thought it was it is kind of mind-blowing to me, but it's such a simple concept. So first of all, any advice about for Amy on how
Absolutely.
she talk or not talk to her husband?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to go back to what we talked about in the beginning after Lakelyn introduced me. It might be because of all this aphasia that he really can't have a conversation with you anymore. And it might be okay that you're not talking to him. That said, you're getting a lot of nonverbal expressions from him. You're getting facial expressions. And so it might be that in a lot of ways he's picking up, on some of the things you're saying. So talk, but be careful about asking questions, because if he's not able to respond, that's probably going to be real frustrating for him and real frustrating for you. So I would say just start to try to accept that you're probably not going to have a lot of verbal interaction that's going to be super meaningful to both of you. Again, it might change, or he could have a good day, but for the most part, just know that you want to connect in other ways, but read his body language. And if he seems to be understanding you, tell him stories, reminisce with him, discuss your wedding day, discuss a vacation that you took, tell him about something funny that happened, when you were over at your friend's house. Talk to him, and if he seems engaged and understanding it, then just talk to him. Just say what you want to say. If he seems bored or if he seems irritated, like by his body language and facial expression, I would course correct. Throughout Cruising Through Caregiving, that's the term that I use, is course correct. If it's not working, you got to course correct, change. Do not get wedded to doing it one way only. So what Lakelyn was sharing is in Cruising Through Caregiving, and I also wrote an article for Women's Alzheimer Movement.org for Maria Shriver's website. And it was about the concept of if somebody has dementia, regardless of the gender of either person. So let's say, let's use you as an example. It's your husband and you. And I want you to consider how a lot of men hang out. A lot of men, so my example that I share a lot is my husband can go out with a friend, and I'll say, they'll go out to watch a basketball game or a football game. And he'll come home and I'll say, how did it go? What's going on in that person's life? And he'll say, I don't know. We were watching the game. Like, they didn't really have a conversation. They just kind of hung out and enjoyed each other's company. So I like to say, think about, and again, not all men are like this, but a lot of men, they don't necessarily need to talk to have conversations. To have a connection. They don't need to enjoy one another's company. They don't need to have a conversation always. They can play golf and not really have a meaningful conversation. They can watch a game and not really necessarily have a meaningful conversation. They can watch a movie. Or go to a concert. They don't necessarily, they can build a house together, like they can, do something construction wise. They don't need, that's the way that they're connecting, is just spending time and doing an activity. I think for a lot of us, especially female caregivers, this is completely foreign to us, because women more often than men, now not every woman is like this, but most women, we feel the way you connect is talking, sharing intimacies, sharing confidences, asking for one another's advice. And I think that big thing that we want to remember is try to think of, if you and your loved one aren't able to connect verbally like you used to, try to think of yourselves as two guys just hanging out. Maybe you're watching a game, maybe you're listening to music, maybe you're taking a walk, and try to just remind yourself. The other thing that I want to say, because this is a husband and wife relationship, is to consider, can you still connect through intimacy, through sexual intimacy? Now, a lot of people have different viewpoints on that. Some people are comfortable, some people are uncomfortable with their spouse, but that is a way that spouses and couples can connect. And if that person seems like they're interested and you're still interested, it might be something interesting to keep up with. There's a book that I love. It's called Dr. Ruth's Guide to Alzheimer. I believe it's Alzheimer's Care, and it's by Dr. Ruth Westheimer and Pierre Lehoux. And it's all about, intimacy. And it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual activity, but how to have that physical intimacy with someone who has dementia.
Those are some great suggestions, Jennifer. We've been throwing out a lot of different books, so hopefully we can capture all those for you.
There's so many good ones.
Recording, I know. Listen to the recording again and re-jot down some of those books that we've been talking about. But we hope that is helpful to you, Amy, as you find ways to connect with your husband, even though he may not be able to be verbal. And we do have time for about one or two more questions. And we had a gal named Jennifer who wrote in. She had a very long story she shared with us, and she kind of had a lot of different questions throughout. But I think that maybe one thing we haven't talked yet about that we get lots of questions on when it comes to socializing is she says, hearing the same questions repeated within a few minutes and responding as if it's the first time, not knowing how to address it or feeling not knowing how to address it, it can be challenging. Jennifer, do you have any advice? Because I know people, many caregivers often express to me that they struggle with the repetition piece because someone with dementia is likely to ask some of the same questions over and over, and it can be very frustrating. So any advice for that part of the socialization of someone living with dementia?
Yeah, Lakelyn, I couldn't agree more. This is such a common problem. People find it so exhausting and so frustrating. So my suggestion would be to try to practice mindfulness and patience with that. Know that it's not going to stop. It's probably going to continue. Try to have some acceptance around it. And the other thing, if it's really driving you crazy, which it does to a lot of people, please get help for yourself and your loved one, because if that repeating is really stressful to you and you're spending most of your day or a lot of your day with that person, it may very well be time to bring in a home care aide, maybe contact home instead. It may be time to look at, bringing in a friend or family to spend time with your loved one for an hour while you go take a yoga class, or, maybe you just run an errand. I think this is one of the most common issues referred to by people who are doing it by themselves. So really, I guess, acceptance and trying to be mindful and patient and try to, but also know that you're going to lose your patience sometimes. Sometimes you are going to get really frustrated and say, I just told you. Forgive yourself, but also make time to step away. Make time to step away. The thing about dementia, it's horrible. All these diseases are terrible, but you always get a second chance. And if you maybe lose your patience with your husband or your mom, you're going to get another chance to do it better the next time.
Those are some great suggestions. And I think one important thing you mentioned there, Jennifer, was that as caregivers, we have to learn how to forgive ourselves, because a lot of working with a loved one who has some form of dementia, there's going to be a lot of trial and a lot of error. And for some people, they may feel like there's more error than there are wins or successes. But you also made another great point that you do get the opportunity to try again. And every day is a new day. And you need to just be kind to yourself as a caregiver, because you are doing the best that you can with the resources, the skill set that you have, and it's okay to ask for help. I think that's something you made a great point. It might be time to ask your sibling or your neighbor, or call a home care agency, or look into adult day for your loved one, adult day centers, just to take a little break every now and then, because you can't be a good caregiver unless you take care of yourself, or you'll be a better caregiver if you're better taking care of yourself. So great suggestions. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And we hope that that is helpful to the Jennifer who wrote in, multiple Jennifers here today. But
Great
thank
name.
you everyone for, yes, it is. Thanks everyone for all the wonderful questions. And before we wrap things up, I do want to move to our resource slide. I wanted to share with you some of Jennifer's information. If you want to learn more about Generations Health, you can visit her website. They're listed at the top. And her book, Cruising Through Caregiving, the front cover is right there. And I'll have to say I have the book, and it is such a neat way to talk about caregiving. She has a whole nautical theme that just makes reading it so enjoyable. So if you have some time, look into that. And Jennifer, can they find that on like Amazon or at Barnes & Noble? Where can they find that?
Sure. So first of all, if you go to cruisingthroughcaregiving.com, you can get a free chapter of the book and test it out. But it is available on Amazon. It's actually still, thankfully, in Barnes & Noble retail stores nationwide. The other suggestion, if you are on a budget, it's in most libraries. So check it out at your local library.
Fantastic. You forget about the library sometimes these days with all the other avenues of getting books. So thanks for that suggestion. If you haven't already joined our caregiving community, please check out helpforalzheimersfamilies.com and join or like our Facebook page, Remember for Alzheimer's. We also have some great resources on confidencetocare.com and caregiver stress. If you're looking for that extra in-home care assistance, to give yourself some respite or extra hands in the home, please visit homeinstead.com. And then as Jennifer and I were talking back and forth about today's chat, she also had some additional resources. So Jennifer, do you want to talk about those last three resources?
Absolutely. So just the one that I wanted to mention is N4A. Actually, it's org, N4A.org.
Sorry about that.
Not .com. Sorry about that. It's N4A.org, not .com. But if you are not connected with your local area agency on aging, there is one in every single county or city in this country. And the great thing about your local area agency on aging, if you go to N as in Nancy, 4A as in Apple.org, you plug in your zip code and it'll show you where your area agency on aging is. Make a friend there. Ask them about what free and low cost resources, or if say you decided, you know what, it is time for mom maybe to go to a senior living community, they can give you a list in your geographic area, so it kind of cuts down on some of the research you have to do. The other thing that's wonderful about your area agency on aging is, again, they're funded by our government. The thing that's terrific about it is if there are any new grant programs, I've worked with area agencies on aging where they sometimes have special grants for caregivers and for people who have dementia that you can use for things like home care or other services. So I'd make a friend there. The Alzheimer's Association, of course, is another wonderful partner, alz.org, and they have more information than you could possibly go through.
Wonderful. And then the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. I know you had mentioned you had written an article for them. Do you just want to, I think we have a couple minutes to talk about that site and what maybe they can find there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Maria Shriver is real active with trying to educate people about dementia, in particular because it is impacting more women than men, because women are mostly the caregivers, not always, no offense to any of the gentlemen that are on the call, and women suffer from Alzheimer's and many of the other dementias at higher rates. So Maria Shriver's website, I actually am writing a monthly column for her on the women's Alzheimer's movement.org, but she also has lots and lots of other authors writing articles and different resources, interviews with Maria, and she's just doing so much wonderful advocacy with Alzheimer's and dementia research.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that information. And if we move to the next slide, I just do want to briefly mention next month, we are going to have Dr. Julie Masters. She is the chair of the gerontology department at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. She's going to be talking about preparing for the final years. As we know, with a dementia diagnosis, unfortunately, there is no cure for dementia, so eventually the individual will pass away. So that can be very challenging for family caregivers to prepare for. So Julie has a really beautiful way. I've actually taken one of her courses, Death, Dying, and Grieving, at the university, and it was my favorite course I've ever taken. She has a great way of combining humor and sentiment when it comes to talking about the final years. So please join us for that on May 16th. And Jennifer, I just want to thank you again so much for joining me today, for answering all the fantastic questions that came in. I want to thank everyone on the line for joining us. But Jennifer, thanks so much for your time. You have been a wealth of knowledge, and I learned something new today, and I hope everyone else did.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, and please big thing is don't do it by yourself. Reach out to somebody for help.
Thank you. Beautifully said. And caregivers out there, please be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll talk to you again on May 16th. Have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.